In this 18-minute episode, my coworker David Stanfield will explore the example that NBA star Tim Duncan has set for outstanding teamwork. What does it take to achieve top success in a profession while at the same time staying humble, accountable, and respectable? David will break it down for us as we take a look at Tim Duncan's life and career. Welcome back to Brain Chatter, where we listen past the daily noise and explore topics at the intersection of leadership, workplace culture, profit, and sustainability. I'm your host, Derek Brown. Today's topic is A Playbook for Success, Tim Duncan. David, will you start off with a summary of Tim Duncan's professional success?
Well, thanks, Derek. I'd be glad to. I would say that a summary is a good idea because Tim Duncan's achievements are many. But I'll start this way. Tim Duncan played professional basketball in the NBA for 19 years. The San Antonio Spurs picked him with the first overall pick in the 97 draft, and he went on to become the NBA's Rookie of the Year that year. He played at Wake Forest, and he won several awards. He won both the John Wooden Award and the Adolph Rupp Trophy for being the best basketball player in college. And his senior year, he was the College Player of the Year. During his 19 years in the NBA, he led the Spurs to the NBA championship 5 times. He was also a 2-time league MVP, a 3-time NBA Finals MVP, a 15-time NBA All-Star, and he was inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2020. Simply put, a lot of experts believe Tim Duncan was the greatest power forward in NBA history.
You shared an article with me from an online publication, Air Alamo, which covers the San Antonio Spurs organization. That article noted something important about the beginning of Tim Duncan's career. When he was a young man living on the Caribbean island where he grew up, his future NBA coach visited Tim's family. And Tim's father said this to the coach: "I'm going to hold you responsible to make sure that when Tim's done, he's the same person he is now." This seems to say that Tim's family felt Tim was a good person up to that point and valued his character above potential wealth and fame. How did that play out as it relates to the commitment to mentorship and accountability by the coach over the years ahead?
Yeah, Derek, I think that's an accurate understanding of that quote and what Tim's father was trying to convey. So if your listeners are familiar with Tim Duncan and the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs, Greg Popovich, they probably know that they had a special relationship during their 19 years together. Coach Pop, as he's known, is pretty meticulous and demanding. He said on many occasions, though, that Tim Duncan allowed himself to be coached. And I think that's important because, in other words, Tim Duncan really didn't expect special treatment, even though he was a pretty special player. And he led by example. And Coach Popovich really appreciated that. And Pop criticized him a lot, whether it was in the huddle or in practice. And that can be a humbling approach, especially to people who have a pretty high self-opinion of themselves. But I'm sure you agree that people who aren't willing to be coached or corrected or criticized, they risk derailment, both in their career and life in general. And so I think that's really what Tim Duncan's father was talking about. He asked Coach to make sure that his son didn't allow his character to get corrupted over the course of a professional career based on all the fame and attention he was going to get. And I think Coach Pop helped him deal with that fame and helped him avoid derailment. The derailment that's so common with so many megastars and celebrities when they're trying to deal with all the wealth and recognition.
Well, some people might argue that on the court, Tim was the so-called smartest man in the room. In other words, he was the best at his game on his team. And yet, despite that fact, he had a real focus on sharing both the spotlight and the opportunities with his teammates at arguably a higher level than most NBA stars in his position of skill and fame. Would you mind saying more about this?
Oh, I agree with you 100%, Derek. There's a quote out there that Coach Popovich allegedly said, which is this: "When I call your name on offense, it's not for you to score. It's for the Spurs to score. In other words, he trusted Tim. He trusted Tim Duncan's judgment to figure out who was in the best position to score and make it happen. What has been officially documented over the years, however, is that Duncan didn't care who got more minutes. He didn't care who took the last shot, who won the game, who got more attention in the press. He just wanted to win. And I'll also tell you this. Coach Pop said that Duncan was the most selfless individual he'd ever been around. He said he just wanted to do the best job he possibly could. And Tim just wanted to help his team and his teammates get better. That's a pretty cool thing to be remembered for.
I agree. Let me do a listener introduction of you, David, for our audience. David joined Ken Chapman and Associates Incorporated in 2024 after retiring from the U.S. Air Force in the grade of colonel. He has led organizations, troops, and programs during his 30-year career in the United States Air Force, including multiple tours as a commander and a stint as an adjunct instructor at the U.S. Air Force Academy. David has a Bachelor of Public Administration from the University of Mississippi, a master's degree in Human Resources Development from Webster University, a master's degree in Counseling and Human Services from the University of Colorado, and a Master of Strategic Studies degree from the Air War College. He lives with his family in Colorado now. David, you mentioned to me that the story of Tim Duncan's self-leadership style so resonated with you over the years that he was an often go-to for when it came to examples for troops and your students at the Air Force Academy. Would you say more about how important Tim Duncan's example was for you?
I'd be glad to. He was pretty important to me. I'm a basketball nut. I love sports, especially basketball. But I pay attention to what's going on around me, and I always try to find somebody in mainstream culture that I can use as an example when I'm trying to relate to other people. And I think most people appreciate a humble leader more than an arrogant one. And so I'm always on the lookout for examples to either try and replicate or avoid. And that's where Tim Duncan comes in. I like to pay attention to what happens to people after they achieve the success. That's really, to me, the most fascinating aspect. In many cases, both in fact and fiction, people become, I would say, victims of their own success, and they fall. They stop doing the things that made them successful in the first place, or they start believing that they alone are responsible for their success, and they become hard to get along with. Or maybe they start placing demands on people that would have killed their own confidence back in the day. What I've observed is that, sadly, many successful people just stop putting in the effort that got them to where they are, and they become hard to get along with because it's their way or the highway. And Tim Duncan, to me, was the absolute opposite of that. He achieved success through hard work, determination, and he stayed humble. And he was accountable for himself and his actions. To me, that type of person just resonates. Someone I want to be like. That's why I used to use him as an example of success, what right looks like to my colleagues, my coworkers, the troops I led, others I encountered during my military career. He didn't complain. He just worked hard. He did what was asked of him, and the results speak for themselves. And I think that resonated with the people I talked to about Tim Duncan. They understood what I was trying to get at with that.
That is pretty extraordinary. And it's not lost on anyone listening that NBA stars probably have an outsized impact on the lives of one of the top watching demographics for the NBA, namely young men. What does it mean to have someone who openly and consistently lives a life of humility, hard work, teamwork, and who openly accepts accountability and mentorship in front of such a huge and important audience?
Well, it means a lot. You see so many people that abuse that idea of fame. It's all about themselves, and they don't realize the impact it has on others. Humility, hard work, teamwork, accountability, that's what pays off in the end. But it's not easy to lead a life like that when you're in the public spotlight. Take the concept of accountability, for example. The founder of our firm, Dr. Chapman, has been successful in showing others how important it is for individuals to be accountable to themselves as well as others. As he puts it, our first responsibility as leaders is to manage our own words and behaviors. And stop asking, who can I trust, but rather, who can trust me? But if you look at celebrities, especially those in sports, you don't often see that. They're talented. They live off their own natural talent, but they miss out on the benefit of using that talent to make a difference in someone else's life through such things as being a good teammate, being teachable, being willing to learn more, and then paying it forward and help others succeed. So what I see in Tim Duncan is a great example of getting it right in that regard. He led himself well. In fact, when he announced his retirement back in 2016, I remember this very clearly. It wasn't through fanfare or festivity. He didn't take a final tour of the league. He just, after the season was over, he told the Spurs he was retiring. And he wrote a one-page statement, double-spaced, I might add. He was not a man of many words, so it was a one-page statement. It was double-spaced in large font. In fact, Derek, I challenge your listeners to go online to X, formerly Twitter, and read it for themselves. I think that'll be more impactful. Type in Tim Duncan letter in X, and you'll see copies of it on various feeds, things such as ESPN. But what he said in that letter, wow, I think it really speaks volumes to the type of person he was and the type of character he had when he went out and retired.
Thank you so much, David. And I will put a link to that letter in our show notes as well. If someone needs a direct link to it, just go to brainchatterpodcast.com. Not many people get to live their example of self-leadership on international TV in front of millions of people watching. Most of us would not want that responsibility to start with, but everyone gets a new chance every day to be humble, hardworking, to be a team player, and to encourage those around them with boots on the ground examples. How does the example of Tim Duncan translate to ordinary people like me?
You know, Derek, I think that most people actually want to be recognized for something. They seek validation, if you will, whether it's for being a subject matter expert or being a good leader. They're looking for that validation. And you're right. You know, having your effectiveness consistently judged in the court of public opinion is probably pretty challenging. I wouldn't know about that, but I'm sure it's challenging. I'm sure many of your listeners face similar scrutiny every day at work. Maybe it's not by millions, but you know, there's people looking at them, and that's tough. The number of eyes you have on you, if you increase it, that increases the pressure. You see public figures whose fame becomes infamy because they can't properly respond to the constant judgment and criticism they're receiving. But as I said earlier, you know, when I run across someone who I consider to be successful, whether it's a historical figure or a celebrity, I just like to investigate to determine how they found that success and, more importantly, how they stayed successful. So, in answer to your question, you know, how does Tim Duncan's example apply to ordinary people like us? I'd say two things. First, we don't need to be famous to get that validation we seek. If you work hard and you're good at your chosen vocation, what I mean by that is when you can take a task and make it look easy, to me, that's a sign of a professional, and that's validation. I tried to do so many things in life that looked easy because I saw others do it and they made it look easy. And I quickly realized, you know, that it's not easy. And so I gained a greater appreciation for the people that could actually do it. I'm talking about things like, you know, woodworking, machinery, giving a speech, teaching a class, or shooting a basketball. It's hard work, and those who make it look easy to me are the true professionals. But, you know, and the second thing I'd say to the listeners is remember what Booker T. Washington said about success. I remember this quote well because I've used it so much, it resonated with me. But he said, success is to be measured not so much by the position that you've achieved in life as by the obstacles you've overcome while trying to succeed. So I think that's pretty powerful. And so that's how I'd respond to your question, Derek.
Well said, and thank you for sharing all of that. What else should I have asked you, David, about Tim Duncan's example, or what else would you like to add?
Wow, that's a great question. Yeah, what comes to mind is I have a signed, framed copy of a Sports Illustrated cover that featured an article on Tim Duncan from a few years ago. The cover, if you can picture this, the cover was of Duncan blocking Kobe Bryant, and the caption on the cover reads "Substance over style." I used to keep this above my desk in my military career to remind me and anyone else who came in to visit me of the profound beauty in that statement. You see, Tim Duncan, he had a reputation of being a boring player because of how he played the game. I remember sports writers called him the big fundamental because he wasn't flashy like Magic Johnson or Larry Bird or Michael Jordan. He didn't do fancy windmill dunks. He didn't celebrate after he scored. He had no elaborate moves and cross dribbles to get in a scoring position. He was just simple and effective. He did the fundamentals well. You know, he scored, he rebounded, he blocked shots, and he passed. I also remember when he won his first championship ring with the Spurs, Sports Illustrated called him a quiet, boring MVP. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't want to be remembered as being boring. But that didn't bother Duncan. Tim Duncan kind of made that into a strength. He once said that, if you show excitement, then you're also going to show disappointment or frustration. And if your opponent picks up on the frustration, you're at a disadvantage. And Shaquille O'Neal, in his autobiography, he wrote about Tim Duncan. He said, Tim Duncan was a guy you could never break. Shaq could talk trash to Patrick Ewing or get in somebody else's face and get a rise out of them, like, people like Alonzo Mourning, people known to show their emotions. But he said when he went at Tim, he looked like he was bored. And so I bring this up because, there's really no getting around the fact that there are fundamental habits that contribute to success in one's vocation, and unhinged displays of emotion aren't one of them. Rather it's the continued dedication to your trade, to your leadership, to your ability to get along with others. That's what yields the substance upon which success can be built. So I'd say this, Tim Duncan, he really gives proof to the idea of letting the quality of the work speak for itself. If you put effort into achieving substance before you pursue style, that's a recipe for success. In reality, the substance, the idea of being very good at what you do, that's what makes us a pro in life.
Wow. Well said. Excellent points. Thank you for sharing all of this, David. I hope that you'll be willing to be a Brain Chatter podcast guest again in the future.
I'd be honored.
Thank you so much. And we're going to put links to the resources, the articles that you mentioned, brainchatterpodcast.com listener notes, if anybody wants to go out there and click on those. And I'll also link to your bio, David, and your LinkedIn account in case anyone wants to connect with you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Brain Chatter is a production of Ken Chapman & Associates Incorporated. We assist clients across North America and beyond with leadership development, corporate culture transformation initiatives, behavior-based professional development for health and safety issues, individual and team assessments, conflict and performance management, succession planning, and team building. Making a difference in organizations and individuals' lives for over 40 years. Learn more at leaderscode.com. And please consider ranking and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. The more reviews or rankings we receive, the more the algorithms recommend us to new listeners. Thank you very much for your valuable time. Authorized use of basketball soundtrack from upbeat.io.